I've entitled the talk Giving Teachers the Confidence to Engage in Meaningful Active Classroom Research, and I think the reason possibly why we are a small but mighty bunch is because it is going to be MFL specific. MFL is my thing, it's not just my job, it's my life. I force my children to speak languages, my husband is often abandoned because of languages, and I work at the University of York training the next generation of outstanding teachers, which is a huge privilege. Just to let you know, the presentation is already on my website, which is petitepipelette.wordpress.com. So if you want to contact me after today about anything that I talk about, then please do. I probably won't reply until after the bank holiday weekend, but I will make sure that I reply to you. So I'll come back to that, that's on the final slide, so if you haven't managed to get that down. So just a little bit about who I am, how I'm here, and I think I was asking myself that very question this morning, you know, what am I doing on a Saturday morning on a bank holiday weekend when I could be spending time with my children and with my husband. So I suppose the image represents the fact that I wear lots of different hats. So I'm a mum and a wife, and I would like to think that that's first and foremost, but sometimes that does slip down the pecking order because of this love of languages and because of this love of teaching. So I used to be a modern languages teacher, and I still do teach primary languages. So I go into my son's year 2 class, and we have lots of fun with a French bear called Norbert, who comes around with the children and learn about his pets. These are the children in the class that I teach. So I go and do half an hour a week just to keep my hand in and to try out some of the things that I think are effective in the world of languages. My main job, when I'm not being a mum and a wife and a teacher, is that I work at the University of York, and I've been there for the last 3 years, where I went from being a classroom teacher. I worked for 10 years in West Yorkshire and in York at a language college, and so now I have the privilege of training teachers, but I'm still very much interested in what goes on in the classrooms. And because the PGC is a very much partnership model, we partner with schools in our local area. It's great because I get to nosy in on about 40 or 50 different schools every year and find out what they do. My husband was questioning me this morning, saying, why do you call yourself an early career researcher? You're fast approaching 40. And I said, well, really, when I was in the classroom, I don't know that I was necessarily encouraged to engage in research. I was so busy being a teacher. And my husband used to tell me off because I used to work part-time, and I always used to say, I'm just a part-time languages teacher. And he said, you're never just a teacher because you spend hours and hours, probably more hours than he does in his work in the health service, you know, thinking about teaching, and when I'm not teaching, I'm thinking about teaching, when I'm not thinking about teaching, I'm talking about teaching, and it's probably terribly boring for him. And then when I'm not teaching or teacher training or talking about teaching, I work for companies such as Network for Languages, and on my rare days off, I do consultancy work. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. What I want to do today, I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading it out, but I think there are sort of 4 main points. I'd like to look at some concrete examples, and these are from my own teaching practice. So I've only been out of the classroom for just over 3 years, and I do have quite a lot of contact still with schools. I used to be a lead practitioner. It's a real shame because they put me on at the same time as somebody from the Specialist Schools and Academies Trust, and I desperately wanted to see her. So if none of you had turned up, then I would have been going down the road to see her. But I worked as a lead practitioner, a team of about 12 teachers, where we provided training for teachers by teachers. So it was very much about what was going on in my classroom at that time and how it was effective practice. Now I work at the university. I have the pleasure of marking, maybe it doesn't feel like a pleasure when I've got 20 scripts, but I have the pleasure of marking master's level assignments about modern languages, and lots of them are solution focused and focus on some of the issues that I think schools have. But my point with that is that their master's level work very rarely sees the light of day, and I think that's a real shame, and that's maybe something to think about in the future. And then finally, there is some really great research out there in all subjects, but particularly in modern languages, and it's not often talked about or known, so I'm going to highlight that as well. So I'm just going to show you a very quick clip of my daughter Amélie, and she is 8. My husband is English. Oh no, this is the wrong one. Maybe it's linked to the other one. Okay, so this is a presentation that I did. I don't know whether it's got the date on there. Probably has somewhere. Back in 2009, I think. Yeah, here we are. So this is when I went for my selection day for the Special Schools and Academies Trust. It was at Wembley Stadium. It was probably the most threatening interview I've ever been to in my entire life. It was in one of the boxes overlooking the stadium. And at the time, I was interested in phonics. So my daughter, Amélie, I don't think we are going to link to that video. Let me just try that again because it looks like I might have hyperlinked it wrong. Oh no, let me just check the other one. Maybe they're in reverse order. No, not to worry. Okay, so Amélie is 8. She speaks almost fluent French. My husband is English. I'm English. I am one of those pushy parents who want my children to do what I do, and French has always been my passion. So when they were small, I sent them to a French childminder because I didn't marry the Frenchman of my dreams, but I married my husband, who's perfectly lovely. And so they've picked up lots of language. They had about 30 hours a week, and it fascinated me that just through having all this listening exposure, so roughly 30 hours a week, in the space of 2 weeks with the childminder, they had roughly the same amount of language input as the average child in year 7 has in a whole year. So it's no wonder really that their language skills came on quite quickly. Their pronunciation was perfect, and yet I was despairing on a daily, hourly basis that the kids that I work with in French and German, their language, their ability to manipulate language was okay, but when it came to transferring what was written down into what was spoken, it just sounded more Yorkshire than French, and it wasn't particularly pleasant. So when I was a lead practitioner, what was great about that role was that I got to be freed up from the shackles of the classroom, so 10 days throughout the year, and I got to work on this concept of phonics in a foreign language. And so I basically worked with the kids in my classroom, and I sort of looked at the baseline. They were all saying, it's really hard, we don't know how to turn the written word into the spoken word, and the picture was pretty depressing. I then went away and racked my brains about what could I do, how could I change my practice so that instead of just saying, oh, they're just not very good at speaking in a foreign language, that the emphasis on what I could do as a teacher to try and make it more accessible. So I went and changed what I did, and over the course of about 6 months I implemented lots of different strategies, and then at the end of that 6-month cycle I interviewed the children. I said, do you feel more confident? Do you think your speaking skills have moved on? Has this work been useful? And it was a resounding yes. And then I wrote that work up. So I worked for a company which was funded by the government, and as with all of these wonderful projects, unfortunately the funding dried up. And so Links into Languages, and I won't click on that link, but there's an archive website for languages professionals, and a whole archive of teacher-led small-scale research that was conducted by Links into Languages. And the money that the government provided meant that teachers who are very time poor, let's face it, you're the key ones because you're here on Saturday morning, but the majority of people that I work with over the course of the years would say, why are you turning up on a Saturday morning to do more stuff about teaching? You spend your life during the week teaching, and your evenings, and now you're giving up your Saturdays and abandoning your husband and your young children. What I also went on to do was blog, personally blog, but also blog for a company called Network for Languages. So Links into Languages is government funded, the funding dried up, Network for Languages emerged from Links into Languages, and is a charity, if you like. So unlike Links into Languages, you pay slightly more to attend the training, but it's on average it's about £100 a session. And so I blogged for them about how to accelerate language learning using phonics. You could argue that wasn't necessarily research, but it was based on something that I did in my own classroom that actually had a really big impact on how the children were able to manipulate and produce accurate French. By blogging about it, which I think is an accessible way of accessing CPD, lots of other teachers were informed about that, and so I've had numerous emails since those blogs and since the work that I did with Links into Languages and the 10-minute guide that I produced, to say, do you know what, I've been trying this with my own students and actually it's really effective, and I might have had to tweak this or that and I've done it my way, but the actual basis of your classroom research has really helped me in my own teaching and learning. And then I've done little bits of work for Future Lab and so on, again to talk about how to use technology in particular to try and narrow that gap between home and school. What I then went on to do, which again, some people might say, no, it's not research. It was research-led because it was about what was going on in my classroom. So the first link, which I'll take you to, is an article that I wrote, again, while I was still in the classroom, about using Skype in one language classroom. And at the time, I was told by my ICT technician that, you know, there were firewalls and it would be impossible, and I couldn't do it, and there's nothing better to motivate me than telling me that I can't do something. So in my languages lessons, this is back in 2012, I used to go into a primary languages classroom, and they liked me and they liked languages. They were year 5, they were quite keen, but they didn't really have a proper audience for their French. And so I set up a video conferencing link with a wonderful teacher, head teacher in a school in northern France called Madame Elcourt. And Sophie and I had a very excited exchange on Skype, which I'd never used before. And we said, yeah, we can get this to work from home to home. Can we get this to work from school to school? And so on a monthly basis, we connected via Skype, completely free of charge. And as a result of that, again, I did some very small-scale research with these Year 5s saying, what did you enjoy about that, or did you enjoy it? And I got them to write down just a few adjectives. And then on the reverse, I said, you know, as if we're using this as a basis, the very first time that we connected, which was exciting for everybody, you know, where do you see this going? What would you like to do in the future? And so by using pupil voice, which I know some teachers are absolutely petrified of still, because if you ask teachers if you're a teacher and you ask your pupils what they would like to change about your teaching or their learning, you then have, the impetus then is on making changes, and that's quite scary. So it's one of those things, I think, where if you have pupil voice, you need to be prepared to act on the suggestions that come back to you, because otherwise there isn't going to be any change. The second one that I'm going to show you is a teaching magazine that I don't know is very well known, researchED. It's completely free of charge to secondary schools, and you can subscribe online to their weekly e-bulletin, which comes out on a Thursday. And I got to know the editor, Pete Henshaw, and on a fairly regular basis, normally 2-3 times a year, I write for researchED. And again, it's based on my research interests. Now that I'm at the university, I have a little bit more freedom to experiment with what's going on in our partner schools. And so, I don't know how clearly you can see this, but the most recent post that I wrote is about our subject associations. Because the world is a different place and because there isn't as much money around, I think, and mainly because I'm on the Executive Council of the Association of Language Learning, but it's really important that we are members of our subject association, because at the moment, in this financially difficult world that we're in, they are pretty much the only people who offer support and guidance and CPD, and actually at a very reasonable price. The next one you might see was when I was invited to the Westminster Education Forum about the review of the national curriculum, and this was before the new national curriculums had actually been decided upon. They were just in their draft format, and that gave me the opportunity from a trainer and a teacher perspective to attend the event and to then disseminate that information about what Ofsted, what people very high up in the Department of Education were saying in terms of the future of language learning, which to me as a teacher trainer is important. But it's not just about me holding that information, it's actually really important to get that out to practicing teachers, because it's going to impact on their day-to-day lives in the classroom. The next one is about flame. So I think most of you, if you are involved in the world of languages, will have heard of CLIL. And on the continent, it's very common to teach languages through the medium of a different subject. So it might be that you teach science through Spanish or ICT through German. And there are some really forward-thinking schools in the UK that are doing that and that are piloting CLIL. and it's been rebranded, if you like, by the Association for Language Learning as Flame, a French